All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have a lot of great information to get through, so we're going to get started shortly. As far as admin notes, today's webinar will be recorded and available online within a week. You will also receive a copy of the slides and your CDR CEU certificate in the follow-up email. Lastly, if you have questions, please use the Q&A window in the chat box, and we'll do our best to get to questions at the end. All right, so hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar, Gut Check, Nutrition for Digestive Health and Beyond. My name is Megan Maizano. I'm the Director of Nutrition and Regulatory Affairs at National Dairy Council, and I will be moderating this session. We are so excited to host this webinar, but we have a lot to cover, so let's get started. Right. So I am delighted to be joined by today's expert speakers, Dr. Hannah Holscher and Amanda Sauceda. Dr. Holscher is an associate professor in nutrition in the Department of Food Science and Human Nutrition and a member of the Division of Nutritional Sciences, the Institute of Genomic Biology, the National Center for Supercomputing Applications, and the Personalized Nutrition Initiative at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. She completed postdoctoral training focused on the human microbiome, a PhD in nutritional sciences, and a BS in Food Science and Human Nutrition at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. She's also a registered dietitian. Dr. Holscher's lab uses clinical interventions and computational approaches to study the interactions of nutrition, the gastrointestinal microbiome, and health. Amanda Sauceda is a pizza-loving registered dietitian nutritionist specializing in gut health. In her business, Amanda educates people on the importance of gut health while helping them find their own version of gut-friendly with her method called the Mindful Gut. Amanda received her bachelor's and master's of science degrees in nutrition science from California State University, Long Beach, and is also a university lecturer there where she teaches nutrition. So we are in good hands today. These are our disclosures, and these are our learning objectives. All righty, so let's get started. So why are we talking about digestive health? So first, as many of us know, Americans are very interested in gut health. About 1 in 3 Americans seek digestive health benefits from the foods they eat. And this makes sense because about 60 to 70 million Americans are affected by some sort of digestive disease. In fact, 40% of Americans have actually stopped a routine activity due to discomfort from GI symptoms. So gut health is really affecting many Americans' quality of life. Yet, while many Americans are interested in gut health, many feel uninformed. A recent Ipsos survey on behalf of MD VIP found that 85% of participants failed their gut health IQ quiz. Nearly half felt unsure if gut health was real or just a fad topic, and 40% relied on the internet for research and advice on the topic. And the attention over gut health really makes sense because over the last 10 to 15 years, research on the microbiome has exploded, right? Thanks to programs like the Human Microbiome Project, launched by the NIH in 2007, over time, the research scope has gradually increased along with deeper and more specific content when it comes to how gut microbes affect human health. But as you will find from this presentation, the microbiome and gut health is super complicated and multifaceted, and we still have a lot to learn. So how can we as trusted health and wellness professionals support our audience, whether it's patients, clients, or consumers with evidence-based advice when it comes to gut health? Our goal for this webinar is to help you with just that. Now, before we begin, I really want to thank all of you for submitting really good and really thoughtful questions in your registration survey. We read, reviewed, and consolidated them and did our absolute best to incorporate them into the presentation. And we'll also address the more frequently asked questions in the final part of the presentation. Right. So let's get started. Hannah, handing it over to you to discuss the evolving research landscape of diet, health, and the microbiome.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I am really excited to be here, and I am just so grateful that so many people took the time out of their busy schedules today to be here. This time of year is so incredibly busy, and I'm just really excited that I get to talk more about this topic with you all. So I'm going to be talking about diet microbiota connections to health with a focus on biotics and fermented foods. So what do I mean by biotics? Well, it's these terms. Thinking about prebiotics and probiotics, most of you are likely already really familiar with these definitions. So I'll be doing a deeper dive into the science that underlies their role in diet microbiota health connections, because having a strong foundation in this area will really help you to be able to better understand the research, new research as it becomes available, like the newer terms, like synbiotics and postbiotics. In this section, I'm more simply going to define these new terms and make some note about the developing research that's available and to keep your eye on. And then in the last section, I'll be focusing on fermented foods and using dairy as a case study for this deeper dive. Before I get started, I really do want to acknowledge, though, that this presentation is meant to be more of a primer on these topics. I literally teach an entire course on this at the University of Illinois, and it's way too much to cover in 20 minutes. However, I'm excited that you all will be able to use the handout from this presentation as a resource. And please do take note, at the bottom of most of my slides, I have resources, peer-reviewed publications that you can use to go back to these topics and better understand them and use them however you see fit within your practice. So let's get started. Within the diet, gut microbiota, physiology domain, this is where I spend most of my time. So as was mentioned, my laboratory uses clinical and computational approaches to study the connections between diet, the gut microbiome, and physiology, which is depicted in this triad. So let's note here that the microbiota is front and center, and we'll take a moment to define this term. So the gut microbiota is defined as a collection of microbes, and the microbiome is a collection of microbes and their functional capacity. This means that we've basically sequenced all of the genetic information available within the sample so that we can not only understand what microbes are there, but also what can they do. And the microbial functional capacity is quite impressive, especially because microbes in our gut can break down nutrient components in foods that escape digestion. And fiber is one of these. So as registered dietitians are recognized as experts in nutrition, it is really important for us to stay abreast to this evolving research on the microbiome, because diet plays such a vital role in shaping the composition and functions of the microbiota and subsequently influencing health. So I hope that from this presentation, we'll be able to set a better stage of how biotics and fermented foods may be able to fit within the diets and support health. So let's start with prebiotics. Prebiotics, you'll note the definition there, you're likely familiar with. So this is a substrate that is selectively utilized by host microorganisms, conferring a health benefit. The most well-studied and accepted prebiotics are listed there: galacto-oligosaccharides, fructo-oligosaccharides, and inulins. And you can find these intrinsic and intact within certain foods. Galacto-oligosaccharides, or GOS, is found in pulses and legumes, and inulin in foods like garlic, leeks, and artichokes. They're also isolated from plants like chicory root in the case of inulin, or they can be synthesized and then added into many different types of foods, from beverages to desserts. The doses generally need to be at least 3 grams per day to induce those health benefits. So let's do a little bit deeper dive on what it means for the substrate to be selectively utilized by microbes. So prebiotic structures matter, and inulin-type fructans are going to contain these beta-2-1 linkages between the fructose polymer. So you'll see a fructose polymer shown on the right with the circle over that beta-2-1 linkage. Certain microbes can break this bond, but our digestive enzymes cannot. Inulin, oligofructose, and short-chain phos will contain these linkages. They mostly vary in their chain linkages, or in their chain, the length. So 3 to 60 for inulin, so that's the longest, where short-chain phos can be quite short, just 2 to 4. Galacto-oligosaccharides similarly will contain beta linkages that we cannot break down, but certain microbes can. So this selective stimulation is really getting to the point that our digestive enzymes cannot break down these beta enzymes, but certain microorganisms have the tools, they have the enzymes to break down these bonds so that they can use them as substrates. So prebiotics in the gut microbiota, what we're essentially saying here is that microbes ferment prebiotics, and bifidobacteria and lactobacilli are the key microbes that have the functional capacity to break down prebiotics and generate byproducts like short-chain fatty acids. And these short-chain fatty acids are not only linked to benefits within the gut, but throughout the body. So let's do a deeper dive into some of this research on prebiotics and health benefits. And I'll note here that, again, listed at the bottom, I've briefly summarized actually 9 different systematic reviews on this topic. So it is a really large one, and you'll be encouraged to go for deeper dives on this as your schedules allow. So starting in the gut, microbial production of short-chain fatty acids is going to contribute to the lowering of pH in the gut. And this makes the environment less conducive for the survival of pathogens like E. coli, Salmonella, and Campylobacter. They also help to educate and stimulate our immune cells in the gut. At higher doses, around 10 to 12 grams, you can see contributions to laxation and regularity. Specific to bone health, this is why inulin-type fructans and GOS that have been isolated and synthesized and additive foods are accepted by the FDA to meet the definition of fiber. They contribute to mineral absorption, specifically calcium absorption as one example, to support bone health. There are also a range of metabolic health benefits that have been demonstrated, including reducing systemic inflammation, lowering blood lipids, and helping with glycemic control. With weight management, there are also demonstrated benefits in this regard, but these are primarily going to be seen in individuals that have obesity and are consuming high amounts of prebiotics, generally around 20 grams per day. So these levels can contribute to reduce energy intake, help improve satiety, and in some cases reduce adiposity, but there can be issues associated with tolerance at such high doses. So let's talk about this tolerance a little bit more, because we have to recognize this is a balancing act. And so when I'm talking about tolerance, I'm referring to the patient's self-reported symptoms like gas, bloating, and rumblings. And so with inulin, the therapeutic doses, or the doses that have been shown in clinical trials to provide a health benefit, are around 15 to 50 grams per day. But some individuals can start to experience mild symptoms at 5 grams per day. With FOS and oligofructose, the therapeutic doses are a bit lower, and fortunately, they can get about up to 10 grams before you'll start to notice mild symptoms. And then with galacto-oligosaccharides, the therapeutic doses are around 20 grams, but in general, most individuals have no or just very mild gas or flatulence at 20 grams. So with the references I've listed on the bottom, I'm only in this slide talking about these specific prebiotics, but if you have interest in all of the fibers that are, all of the non-digestible fibers that are accepted by the FDA, you can use these resources to better understand some of those therapeutic doses and their tolerable intake levels. All right, so now that we've done a deeper dive on prebiotics, let's move on to probiotics. So probiotics are the live microorganisms that, when administered in adequate amounts, confer a benefit to the host. And you'll note the genus, species, and strain designation noted here. So what I also want to note here is that the strains and dosages are really important for linking with the specific health outcomes. To be able to be recognized as a probiotic, it has to be well studied enough. We have to have it taxonomically defined and have the genome sequence, and the doses have to be adequate. You can find probiotics added into foods like fermented milk and yogurt, and also within a range of different supplements. So let's do a little bit deeper dive into the strain-specific effects. So here I've listed 6 different probiotic strains that you may just find listed as B. lactis on some labels. However, depending on the strain, they can provide different health benefits. So this isn't to say that each strain only provides these health benefits listed below, However, those health benefits are the ones that have been studied and reported in the literature. So for necrotizing enterocolitis prevention in preterm infants, that DSM 15954 was shown to have a benefit, BB12 for immunity in infants, and then others for colonic transit time and immunity. So the translational relevance of this is anytime someone asks me, should I take a probiotic? My question is for what? Because the level of evidence for different probiotic strains and their associated health benefits can vary. And I really want to make sure that I know what they may be interested in taking the probiotic for so that I can see if there is evidence for that strain, for that health benefit before making a recommendation. So let's continue down this rabbit hole just a little bit deeper. And I really want to spend just a couple moments talking about the mechanisms of action for probiotic benefits. And this slide is showing the intestinal tract. And in the middle, that blue oval is a probiotic. And so the LTC and that green cell structure are going to be cell surface proteins. And what is happening with these is different immune cells are going to recognize those and contribute to immune modulation. Probiotics also produce and secrete components like bacteriocins, which are antimicrobial, and metabolites that make the surrounding environment unfavorable to pathogens. Probiotic secretions can also help support intestinal barrier function and contribute to systemic health by their signaling through those GPCR receptors. Probiotics also secrete certain enzymes. Notably, they can secrete enzymes that digest lactose, which is one of the reasons why fermented dairy is so much better tolerated by those with lactose maldigestion than a cup of milk. The microbes present in there can help to break down the lactose, and they will remain viable within the gastrointestinal tract and help you to continue to break that down. So let's wrap up the probiotic section. And with that, I simply want to state that there is a large body of research on the different health benefits of certain probiotic strains. So I want to be sure that you're aware of resources that summarize this available evidence. This clinical guide to probiotics is updated every year. To date, there are 238 reviewed publications in this resource. They do evaluate it using a more simplistic evidence evaluation guide. But again, this can be a good resource for you to help quickly summarize the evidence and decide if a particular probiotic may be beneficial for what you're looking for. All right, so now that we've done this deep dive on the prebiotics and probiotics, let's build on the foundation that we've set on understanding these terms so that we can apply it and better and better understand some of these newest terms, which are synbiotics and postbiotics. So synbiotics, the definition is these are a mixture comprising live microorganisms and substrates selectively utilized by host microorganisms that confers a health benefit on the host. On the left here is the complementary, which is simply a combination of a prebiotic and a probiotic, which we know the definition of. On the right is where, when we were crafting this definition, we really wanted to encourage innovation so that scientists would feel they weren't limited to just microorganisms that were already accepted as probiotics or substrates that were already accepted as prebiotics. So what a synergistic symbiotic is it's actually the concept that the microorganism and the substrate are working together to provide the health benefit that might not be possible with either component on its own. Specific to the research on symbiotics, adhering to this new definition, there is unfortunately at this point fairly limited high quality research, but it is evolving and there is some research. So what has been noted through systematic reviews that are noted on the slide, reduced respiratory tract infections, reduced systolic blood pressure, and then also decreased body weight and waist circumference in adults with overweight and obesity. All right, let's move on to that other new term, postbiotics. So while this paper was published in 2021, to me, it still feels really new, and there's a lot of confusion around it. So let's look at the definition and break it down, again, building on what we've been talking about, especially for probiotics, because it has a lot of relevance here for this term. Postbiotics are a preparation of inanimate microorganisms and or their components that confers a health benefit on the host. And so a lot of this research has actually been done on microorganisms that are accepted as probiotics, but they've inactivated them before providing them. And so some of the proposed health benefits and mechanisms similar to probiotics relate to immune modulation, barrier function, and systemic metabolic responses. And so I literally implanted here that same slide that I showed earlier with the mechanisms of probiotics, because a lot of these mechanisms are still the same. Even though the microorganisms have been inactivated, those cell surface proteins can still be recognized by immune cells to provide that immune modulation. Depending on the formulation, it may also still have some of the metabolites that were present and produced by the microorganisms that can again have those benefits on the host. So this is again a growing area of research for us to keep our eyes on. So, but again, since this is a newer term and the research is still developing, right? So at this point, there's limited high quality research, but some of it is quite promising. So with some inactivated bacteria, what's been shown is improved H. pylori eradication. There's also been improvements in pain scores in patients with IBS, and then also improved stool frequency in patients with chronic diarrhea. All right. So biotics, lots of terms, lots of things. Let's move on to fermented foods, because again, all of these biotics and fermented foods, there's a lot of overlap in these terms. So with fermented foods, it again has a definition. So we've got foods that are made through desired microbial growth and enzymatic conversion of food components. Most common food and beverages require lactic acid bacteria, acetic acid, yeast, and fungi. And you can see the most common microbes that have been studied there. One of the things that I want you to be able to take away from this presentation specific to fermented foods is that it can sometimes be difficult to differentiate fermented from not fermented. So take a second to look at this slide, noting that in the gray, these are fermented. On the far left, live microbes are present. In the middle, live microbes may be absent because they've been heated or filtered or roasted. And on the right, these are not going to be fermented. So I'll give you a second just to look through that while I take a quick drink. All right. So a take-home message from this table is, again, it's not always easy to tell if the food is fermented or not. So you may need to do some digging, either by reading the label more carefully or potentially contacting the food manufacturer. This is because some fermented vegetables, for example, let's say olives, they may be a fermented food, but a lot of times, especially within the US, they may actually just been made through brining. So that would put them into the not fermented category. And then the other thing that may not always be completely clear is if there's still live microbes present or not. So a really simple way to be able to tell that is that if it's on the shelf, it's very likely that they're not still live microbes anymore. So what do we know about the benefits of fermented foods? Well, firstly, they may be a source of live microbes. And we've been talking about live microbes because we've been talking about probiotics. So similar to probiotics, some of the microbes within fermented foods can help with immune stimulation and modulation. They also can improve digestion. We were talking earlier about the probiotics can secrete beta-galactosidases, which help with lactose breakdown and lactase improve digestibility. So this can contribute to health benefits as well. The production of the lactic acid while making the fermented food process also helps to inhibit pathogens and food spoilage microbes. So again, just when we think about the acids, the lactic acids, for example, when you break down a prebiotic, you get the production of short-chain fatty acids. Microbes are fermenting foods in their food environment. When they produce those acids, the pH goes down and it's much less possible that these pathogenic bacteria can survive. It also has the benefit of improving the aroma, the taste, and the texture of foods. Fermentation can also increase vitamins and bioactives in foods, and it can remove toxic substrates or anti-nutrients. Sourdough bread, for example, has greater bioavailability of the iron because the phytates have been broken down. All right, so let's spend just the last few minutes doing this case study and just highlighting a few of the components within fermented dairy. All right, so yogurt is created through microbial fermentation of milk by the lactic acid bacteria, Streptococcus thermophilus, and Lactobacillus bulgaricus. Fermentation results in gel-like structures of yogurt, and it contributes to the production of bioactives like peptides. These peptides have shown to have a range of different health benefits, like antihypertensive effects, because they can mimic hormones like ACE enzymes, which can reduce blood pressure. The exopolysaccharides that are made during the fermentation of yogurt are produced by lactic acid bacteria, and so they contribute to that structure, that viscosity of the yogurt, and they further enhance the viability of live microbes that are present, and so they can better survive in the gastrointestinal tract. They also produce, again, I've said this multiple times in multiple sections, but that production of beta-galactosidases so that you can help with lactose digestion. So then just briefly with the food matrix, the dairy matrix can help protect those bacteria. So if there are probiotics added in there, they may be able to better survive into the gastrointestinal tract to provide their benefits. So again, benefits to diarrhea or constipation are going to be specific to what probiotic strain was added, but the dairy matrix helps contribute to that. And some of the ways are that the matrix can buffer stomach acid, it can protect the probiotics, and lactose serves as a substrate and energy source for the probiotics as well. Okay, so a quick overview on the fermented dairy. Again, we talked a little bit about the dairy matrix and how it can help contribute to probiotic survival. If the probiotics have benefits specific to laxation and diarrhea, you're going to get the added benefit of that probiotic survival. It creates biopeptides, which can have health benefits like lowering blood pressure. The exopolysaccharides can have improvements to texture and immunity. And then the beta-galactosidases contribute to lactose digestion. All right, so this is basically the last slide where I just want to give you a second to go through a summary and comparison of these terms. So for prebiotics, they're going to be safe for intended use. They have a health benefit. The substrate is utilized by microbes, and it provides a health benefit. With probiotics, again, very similar, but now we're talking about the microbes. So probiotics are organisms. They're going to be alive, taxonomically defined, and they are going to be in adequate amounts to provide the health benefit. Symbiotics, the simplest complementary ones, is going to be the combination of the probiotics and the prebiotics. With our postbiotics, the most notable one here is, remember, there are microbes, but they've been inactivated, but they're still considered safe for consumption, and they need to provide a health benefit. So lastly, fermented foods, the definition of these doesn't require it to demonstrate a health benefit, but it does have to be safe for intended use. And I don't have time to go into it in this presentation, but you can do some diving deeper in the literature and really think about these terms, because some of them may contain probiotics and some fermented foods may also contain prebiotics. So fermented foods have a lot of opportunities to help benefit health. All right, so just to wrap up here, I hope what you've taken away is that biotics and fermented foods are unique terms, and that their definitions really do matter. Fermented foods may or may not contain live microbes or other biotics, and that biotics and fermented foods can affect the gut microbiota and health. So thank you so much for your time and attention. I'm really looking forward to the discussion at the end.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hannah. I'm definitely going to print off that cheat sheet table at the end. So helpful. So while we know there are definitely some demonstrated benefits of fermented foods for our health, especially probiotic foods, many Americans could certainly consume more. In fact, a 2022 NHANES study found that Americans on average consume only 0.0 servings of yogurt a day. And say that again, 0.07 servings of yogurt a day. So here to help us educate folks on how to incorporate gut-friendly foods and practices into their daily routine is Amanda Sauceda.
Hi, everybody. So excited. I am also going to be printing off some of the Hannah slides because they were super helpful. Okay, I'm trying to change my slide and it's not allowing me to go, actually. Okay, there we go. Hopefully we got it going. All right, so I have a little bit of an agenda. We're going to break this up into 4 parts. So I'm going to talk about how digestive discomfort is so common. Then we'll look at nutrition for gut health concerns. Then we'll look a little beyond nutrition at some other factors, and then we'll end with some gut guidance. So looking at what is gut health. Now, there is no official definition of what gut health is, but this is kind of my approach and how I look at it. It covers digestion, so how we break down our food and absorb nutrients from it. Then we're looking at the gut microbiome, so the bacteria that live there. And then the third area that I think is underrated, which is our gut feelings. And there's such a strong mind-body or mind-gut connection that it really needs to be talked about more. So let's go ahead and start off with kind of looking at these things. Now, gut health can be a bit of a fluffy term. Like Megan was saying, it can be hard for people to connect with, but in general, we can all relate to digestion, or rather issues with indigestion. We've all experienced burping or feeling really hangry, a little bit of an upset stomach. And so for people that have a hard time connecting to this idea of gut health, this might be a good starting point to kind of make those connections. And also, kind of like what Megan was saying, how so many people have some digestive concerns. Here are some statistics around some popular digestive disorders or prevalent digestive disorders. So you can see here, food allergies, 1 in 10 adults, GERD, 1 in 5 people, or IBS, 1 in 20 people, and then even lactose intolerance in 1 in 10 adults. So it is quite common. And with that being said, when people have digestive concerns, it really can impact their quality of life. It can take a toll both emotionally and physically, and sometimes it can be very difficult for people to get diagnosed, and they know like something isn't feeling right, I'm not quite sure what, and so pinpointing that can be hard, which means in order to do this, we need to have some needs identified in order for people to get to root causes. And working with an RD would be amazing if everybody could. And I think actually this is an area where social media can really shine, because you don't know what you don't know. And I think having RDs on social, providing education, we don't realize how many lives we're able to touch by helping people figure things out and helping them to maybe ask questions to their own healthcare team. So the connecting of resources, having a cohesive healthcare team, and the time, the money, the opportunity, and access to be able to do these things. So let's look at some nutrition concerns for gut health as our next area. And I want to start off by saying everybody has a different version of gut friendly. When I first started getting into this field, I was like, I have a really hard time saying that food is gut friendly, because like, for instance, if someone's eating spaghetti, I'm like, well, you can't say it's gut friendly, even if it's using like whole wheat noodles, because what if someone has acid reflux and the tomato's a trigger for them? Or let's say the person driving, eating in the car. Okay, well, like, how can we say that's gut friendly if they're not even focused on, eating? They're not mindfully eating. But what we may not know is that, oh, well, they're actually eating lunch and they never used to eat lunch, and then they were feeling really nauseous. So something is better than nothing for them. So at the end of the day, recognizing that gut friendly is a very unique term, and honestly can be fluid person to person, but also for the same person at different times of their day or meals. Okay, so what are some nutrition concerns for gut health? This is definitely not an all-exhaustive list, but here are some popular concerns that we have. So lactose can be a concern, how much fat is in food, how much acid is in the food, FODMAP, fiber count, and then even looking at food prep, which is honestly a concern across the board for people, right? Meal prepping. So this is why, as we move and we work with people, with our clients, we want to co-create with them. And we can co-create a plan by looking at, what do we see as the biggest concern? What do they see as the biggest concern? And then finding that overlap. And that overlap helps us identify, helps us move forward and helps us better reach the goals for the person that we are working with. So co-creation, I think, is such a huge thing that we really all want to focus in on. So let's look at fiber foods, which is definitely across the board a concern for a lot of people. And there's so much messaging around how we don't eat enough fiber. And it is true, a lot of us don't eat enough fiber, myself included. And so one of the things that I try to remind myself and I try to encourage others is how can we flip the script a little bit? And instead of looking at the gap, how can we kind of start from a better starting point? So like, what fiber foods are they already eating? So for example, if that person has a bowl of cereal in the morning, could we add a chopped apple to it? These little small things really add up. And that's a really good way for us to come in as a dietitian to help people. In addition to that, fiber has so many benefits beyond digestive health, and finding a benefit that we can have them lean into. So for example, if they want those regularity benefits, we can talk about how fiber can help with that. Or maybe they're not looking at gut health benefits and they are more interested in metabolism. Well, fiber is very filling. So maybe we can lean into that benefit, or we can go into specific fibers like prebiotic fibers, like Hannah was talking about in the beginning. So that can be another good way in which we can co-create, but also touch in on a nutrient that many of us don't get enough of. And then on this slide, I also want to mention that kind of like what Hannah was saying, how inulin is being added, inulin or chicory root is being added to so many foods for those prebiotic benefits. It's really important and a great place for our dietitians to provide education around looking at those food labels to see if they're in there, because they might not realize how much they're getting, and to minimize any digestive discomfort, because we do know when we add fiber too quickly, it can cause a little bit of an issue. So we always want to start low and go slow. Now, this is a beautiful table or graph rather, and I think it's a good one to refer back to. This is looking at the lactose spectrum. And when somebody has an intolerance, that doesn't mean automatically they have to eat like no more dairy, or rather not include no more dairy. So here's a really good kind of graph of this. So you can see on one side you have dairy milk, and about a cup has a little over 12 grams of lactose in that serving. So for somebody that is drinking milk, maybe we switch and do a lactose-free milk, which would have 0 grams of lactose. And then you can see a lot of in between here. So for example, you have natural cheeses. About 1.5 ounce serving will have less than 1 gram of lactose, which is really great because so many people love cheese. Speaking of cheese, cottage cheese was having a moment last summer, and I am still here for the cottage cheese ice cream. I don't know if anyone else has tried it. Maybe we could chat about it in the Q&A, but cottage cheese ice cream was legit. But even if they're doing like, the standard cottage cheese and peaches, a 1/2 cup serving has about 3 grams of lactose. And then you see yogurt there at about 4 grams and kefir about a cup at 8.5 grams of lactose. And you can also, if they're nervous about this doesn't mean you have to stick to these standard serving sizes either. Maybe they're really into kefir, instead of a cup and they're a little nervous about that 8 grams, do a 1/2 cup in the smoothie. And now we're back down to about 4 grams or 4.5 grams or 4 grams of lactose. So let's look at some factors beyond nutrition, and looking really at the mind-gut connection. Now, the gut and the brain, they are talking all the time. And it's really interesting to see the amounts of messages being relayed between the two, and often via like this vagus nerve kind of acting like a phone cord back when wires were a thing. But 20% is efferent, meaning 20% of messages are going from the brain to the body. But 80% of messages are going from body to brain, which I think is quite fascinating to see kind of the differences here. Because they're talking all the time, they're like besties, right? But besties, they can be besties, but they can be frenemies. And when we are mentally stressed out, blood is actually shifted or moved away from the digestive system because there's actually a shift in the nervous system. So this is a good reminder to ourselves that how we feel mentally can impact ourselves physically. And in fact, stress does change things with our digestion. It could influence stomach acid. It could increase permeability, put us more at risk for gut dysbiosis, or even change motility. So it's really important to kind of bring that connection to the forefront. And another great place for dietitians to come in is reminding people that in order to digest, we have to rest. And one way that we can encourage better digestion is looking at stress management. And one of the things that can be the trickiest is identifying sneaky stress. Now, sneaky stress is that chronic stress, that stress you get used to. It doesn't mean that stress isn't there. It just means you kind of just, okay, it's there, and you kind of move about your day. But if you have clients, if you have people coming up being like, oh my gosh, feels like my digestive symptoms are coming out of nowhere, what's happening? Well, instead, before we, start eliminating tons of foods, let's look at a factor like stress. How stressed are you? Oh, it's stress, but I'm like, okay with it. It's always been that way. But that doesn't mean it's good for our body again. So looking out for sneaky stress. And one way in which we can encourage, putting our bodies in rest and digest mode is to breathe. So taking a couple deep breaths before eating can help activate the parasympathetic nervous system and just make us in a better zone. Now, beyond stress management, sleeping is also a really interesting thing that can influence particularly our gut microbiome. So the sleeping quality and microbe diversity are linked. So short chain fatty acids, which are those substances that get produced when our gut bugs ferment that fiber, they could influence the master clock. On top of that, microbiota regulates serotonin production, which is a melatonin precursor. And then there's some really interesting research about how gut bacteria follow a cyclic rhythm, and even interesting how probiotics could potentially play a role in the future. Oh my gosh, I love this slide. Because let's look beyond food. Let's look at how we're putting that food, in our mouths. How we eat can influence digestion. And if there's one animal on this earth that is always so focused on eating and just happy to be in the moment, it's a dog. And so we can look at before, during, and after. These are ways in which we can build attention, which in turn can improve our digestion. So this might be a nice slide just to reference back to, looking at things we can do before a meal, like breathing. During a meal, focus on chewing. How many of us forget, to chew well? Chewing is that first step of digestion. And then afterwards, how can we build in food flexibility so that there's no there's no one standard gut-friendly food? How can we build more awareness of body cues like hunger and fullness? So this is a good slide to go back to. And then movement. So on top of stress, on top of sleep, what about moving your body? What's really interesting is active lifestyles could help. And we are seeing some research showing that higher intensity workouts could potentially increase the abundance of gut bacteria, which is generally seen as a good thing, could increase butyrate producing bacteria. And there has been studies looking at differences between the gut microbiome in athletes versus those that are sedentary. We are not done, because those gut bugs could influence a wide variety of other things. I always think it's really interesting to think of, I'm just always fascinated, I guess, let's put it that way. I had kind of touched on it with prebiotics and blood pressure. We are seeing those gut bugs potentially influence blood pressure. It makes sense that it could influence brain health, and then bone health always blows my mind for whatever reason. But it is important to just note here that a lot of this research is emerging, and we're still learning quite a bit. Now, inflammation is a very common concern when it comes to gut health, and it really is a two-way conversation. Here we can see how different factors, some of the factors we just discussed, like stress or movement, medical conditions, sleep, diet, can influence digestion, which could influence gut dysbiosis, which is that imbalance, and which could then feed into the inflammation. So it can very much be a chicken or egg scenario that we have working here. And it can sometimes feel like a little bit of a vicious circle, like where do we start? And where we start usually is okay, how can we include anti-inflammatory foods? And being anti-inflammatory or eating anti-inflammatory does not have to be difficult. And it's often much simpler than we might think. This is a chart from a study in 2019 that assigned inflammation biomarker scores to a variety of different foods. So you guys can refer back to this, but you can see here, like tomatoes can have a positive anti-inflammatory effect. Nuts is on here, yellow, red fruit, vegetables, just like we say, eat the rainbow. You can also see dairy is listed here. You see high-fat dairy and low-fat dairy. And a lot of the research around inflammation in dairy shows either a positive to neutral effect on inflammation. And then on top of that, you can see some statistics here around percents of people not meeting our basic recommendations, which is wild, right? 98% of people aren't meeting whole grain recommendations. So like, ooh, we're fiber, right? 90% aren't eating dairy foods. 28%, although I think that could be higher probably, aren't meeting our sleep recommendations. So really going back to these foundational things that we know can in turn influence our gut health. So let's end with some gut guidance and look at what is the best food to eat for gut health. It is the one you eat, that you actually eat, and the one you enjoy. Kind of going back to a whole wheat, or like, oh yeah, whole wheat foods. Like I will not do a whole wheat tortilla. Won't do it. I will choose to get my fiber foods elsewhere. So it's important that when we are working with clients, we take a look at some of these factors, like the money they have available to purchase foods, the time they have to prep, what foods do they have access to, what are their health concerns, is there a way we can incorporate comfort? Like I said, I'm going to just do a regular tortilla, but I will stuff it with veggies all day long. And also encourage, and their cultural foods and those different things. That's actually a picture of tapache, which is a fermented drink made from pineapple that I have still yet to try, but I really want to try. And then this is also a nice slide to look at some fermented dairy and the protein content, the lactose content as well. So you can see, for example, low-fat yogurt has 9 grams of protein, which we know protein is satiating, so it's a great protein food, about 5.7 grams of lactose. Then you have kefir as well as Greek yogurt. And we got mozzarella cheese hanging out there. So it's a good slide to refer back. And then ending with, we're not quite yet, but what is the best gut goal? The best gut goal is to get more variety. And there are 3 ways in which we can encourage more variety with ourselves and with our clients. The first one is to do tried and true foods, but just try it in a new way. So in this picture, there's in the back is a picture of chicken. And it was not until this summer that I used yogurt as a marinade, like not a marinade, and then to add my breadcrumb coating to chicken. I've eaten yogurt thousands of times, but I've never done it that way. So it's a really easy starting point for people to incorporate more variety. Use a food you like, but try it in a different way. And then you can kind of take it up a notch. How can we do new foods, but in tried and true ways? So we all know that roasting vegetables is probably one of the best ways to eat veggies, right? It's just sweeter, it's just a lot tastier, softens the fibers, which can make it easier for digestion. So maybe taking a vegetable and roasting it, like a new vegetable they never had, but roasting it because we know that's a way that's maybe more likely enjoyable for people. And then you can go all the way out and try new foods and new ways. And there's a picture of salmon there because I'm not going to lie to you. I have yet to like fish. I will tell people eat fish all the time, but for me, that would actually be a new food. And so ways we can do this to encourage variety is, I think soup season can be any time of the year. I know it's cold right now, but I'll eat soup on a 100-degree weather day. But it adds veggies, softens fibers, and also is a way to honor our culture because there's so many different soups and part of different people's cultures. And then lastly, I'll end with this. I'll encourage you guys to get curious, especially with fermented foods, because they have so many of these benefits and could potentially be a source of probiotics. So you can do this by trying to make your own. I still need to try to make yogurt in my Instant Pot. I have a recipe, I just need to do it. You can also do this as a way to explore cultural foods, like I said, tapache. I've made curtido, which is like a slaw, a fermented slaw, which was really good. Or you know what, you could just appreciate the process. I am in a sourdough Facebook group. I will never make sourdough, but I appreciate the process of them making it. So that is the end of my slides. We can go ahead and move on, but thank you guys.
Wow. Thank you so much, Amanda. I just love your holistic approach to gut health and beyond, right? And who doesn't love a good dog pick? Thank you for an excellent presentation. Now, before we transition to questions, I have just a few notes to share. On the slide, here are some resources we thought might be helpful built for this topic on gut health and dairy nutrition. But for the sake of time, I'll move on. But just know that these are in the copies of the slides that you will receive. All right, so if you enjoyed this presentation, we have a library of free resources on our website. And before we get into the Q&A, I do want to note that when we reviewed the registration information, we received a lot of questions related to dairy on topics beyond gut health, such as its role in other health outcomes, farming, animal care, sustainability, and beyond. So for those folks, I highly encourage you to check out our June webinar called Talk Dairy to Me. We covered a lot of these common questions, from things like lactose intolerance to whole fat dairy in the food matrix, as well as grass feeding, antibiotics, and regenerative agriculture, and so much more. So this can be a helpful resource to answer many of those common questions that we saw. Right. So finally, we kindly ask that you complete the post-webinar survey. We take your feedback so seriously, and it helps us to improve our educational content. Also, if we don't get to your question, you can also leave it in the survey along with your contact information or email us. Otherwise, the survey is totally anonymous. Lastly, the slides and CEU certificates from CDR will be provided in the Zoom follow-up email. All right, so we have a lot of questions to get through from registration. We did our best to choose the ones that were most relevant to this topic and the ones that were most commonly asked. So with that in mind, let's get started. All righty. So first question, when it comes to someone presenting with GI symptoms, how do we know whether or not, is it a food allergy? Is it an intolerance? Is it a sensitivity to something, or is it something else? Amanda, why don't we start with you for this one?
Yeah, so this can definitely be tricky. There can be a lot of overlapping symptoms here, and we don't want to necessarily have to cut out a bunch of different foods, because that could lead to like a snowball effect and can have worsening concerns. So this is where it's really important that somebody does work with, ideally a dietitian and their healthcare team, so that they can have this complementary care. But there are some interesting allergy statistics. This is, I think, where a food diary can be a really helpful tool that anybody can do, and can take that information to their dietitian or to their doctor, their health allergist. So that is probably one of the best advice I have, as a tangible thing to take away, is that food diary, because yes, a lot of those symptoms can overlap, and that's where you really have to get one-on-one with somebody to figure this out.
Awesome. All right, so going to the next one. When it comes to supporting our gut health, what makes dairy foods unique to plant-based alternatives? So Hannah, why don't you kick this one off?
Yeah, so these plant-based alternatives can be vital for people that have milk allergies, like we were just talking about. But some of the disadvantages or differences between them can be, you can think of the texture, the viscosity. We're still trying to do a lot of research to understand what are the best matches for the microbes that are going to be used to ferment these plant sources. So it can sometimes be really challenging to get, that same type of viscosity as compared to a Greek yogurt, for example. Some of the other differences between them, and what makes, I would say, fermented dairy especially more unique, is we really have a large body of evidence on the health benefits related to fermented dairy. So the dairy matrix, for example, can help with calcium excretion, and that's one of the mechanisms by which consumption of fermented dairy helps with weight management and weight maintenance. And so, again, it's important to eat the rainbow. Plants are important for fiber, but as far as kind of getting those unique textures and flavors, that can really be a challenge with those plant-based alternatives.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'll add in there. Is that okay, Megan, to add in? Yeah, I'll add in, it doesn't also mean you can't have the exclusion of plants doesn't mean, you don't exclude plants when you have that fermented dairy. And I think fermented dairy works like pairs so well with so many different sources. So I'll just add that in there, that they can complement each other very nicely.
I love that build. Yes, plants and dairy are a great power couple. They really complement each other with things that they each don't have. Awesome build. All right. So the next question, now regarding probiotic benefits, if someone has a sensitivity or an allergy to dairy foods, what are some other options for them? Amanda, why don't you start us with this one?
Yeah, so definitely if someone has a dairy allergy, like don't include dairy, right? Like that is very much off the board, but that doesn't mean there's not many other fermented foods out there. And I really liked one of the slides that Hannah has in her presentation of some of the different fermented foods that are options for people. So like tempeh, kimchi, kombucha could be some of the other like non-dairy fermented foods. And then going back, kind of what Hannah was mentioning, not all fermented foods are probiotic, so it is important to keep that in mind. And I think someone might have asked in the chat, like, what was the fermented pineapple drink, that Mexican fermented pineapple drink? It's tepache. It's Tepache. That is one I have yet to try, but I'm really curious to try. And then curtido is like a sauerkraut. That's like another good place. I think this is where getting curious about other fermented foods and trying to make your own if you can, if you got the time and the fun, to do a fun activity, can be really helpful. So there's a lot of benefits, but it is important to note that, yeah, not all fermented foods will be probiotic. I think, yeah.
Awesome. And yeah, as you mentioned in your slides, for people that don't have a dairy allergy but are lactose intolerant, it's a spectrum.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of lower lactose options for them, like fermented cheeses and yogurt that they may be able to tolerate.
Yes.
Awesome. So going to the next one. Okay, this was a popular one in our registration, and I know some of you guys asked in the chat. So probiotic over-the-counter supplements, useful, helpful, waste of money, it depends. Hannah, can you address this one?
Yeah, and it's a great build on that previous question, right? So probiotics can be added into foods like dairy products. And again, we really want to look at the label and figure out what strain level designation is in there, because different probiotics have different health benefits. And so my question, again, if someone is interested in taking a probiotic, my question is for what? And I'm going to use that resource like the US Probiotic Guide to get me started, filter through it, because there are some that have really strong evidence that has been consistently shown. So antibiotic-associated diarrhea, for example, there are some probiotics that can be super helpful. Traveler-associated diarrhea, Saccharomyces boulardii, I take that whenever I'm traveling internationally. You got to start it about 5 days before and continue it during. But some of the other ones like mood, for example, there's really very, very limited evidence for probiotics and mood at this point. And so those may not be a good use of your resources. So question is, for what? Go to the literature, go to the resources, and there may be a match, but there may not.
Awesome. Love that. Thank you, Hannah. All right, and here's another nice one. Are there any misconceptions or misinformation related to gut health that you want to take the chance to highlight? Amanda, let's start with you, and then Hannah, you can finish.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest misconceptions is something I kind of touched on earlier. It's this idea of gut friendly. There is no one standard version of what gut friendly means. What gut friendly means to me might be completely different for you. So I think helping people, I think there's so much freedom for people in knowing that they don't have to follow this specific yes or no, good or bad foods, and really learning what feels good in their body. And, again, I think that's where like listening to their gut feelings, building that inner awareness can be really helpful. So my major misconception is that there is one standard version of gut friendly, and that is absolutely incorrect.
Love that. Hannah?
Yeah. So the one that people have been asking a lot about recently would be leaky gut. And so I actually just a few weeks ago had a chance to talk with a dietitian, science writer. She was doing an article for the National Geographic, and she wanted to know about this leaky gut. And so what's kind of the misconception there is that all these diseases start in the gut, and a leaky gut is causing every, this list of comorbidities. But really, what we're talking about here, what is well researched, is intestinal hyperpermeability. So if you have a disease like inflammatory bowel disease, yes, certainly you've got intestinal hyperpermeability issues. However, there isn't an accepted definition of a leaky gut. And one of the other challenges, and that people really need to look out for, is that there isn't an accepted clinically validated test to diagnose a leaky gut. We do have some tools like with sugar measures that will, these sugar probes that will give us an idea of it, but that tends to be, leaky gut seems to be one that's very overhyped right now, but the research is definitely not connecting to how you might be able to treat it. But bottom line, for leaky gut, we're just thinking the same general guidelines we would give to anyone for a healthy diet, right? Eat the rainbow, following my plate, those types of things. And I wouldn't be as concerned. It's kind of a flashy term.
Got it. Yeah. So we have 1 minute. So I want to make sure I've been going through the chat, and I know it's 1 o'clock. So let's do one more question for those who are able to stay on. A few people asked about, and I think this will be for you, the effects of freezing or heating probiotic foods on the effectiveness of the live and active cultures. So things like, I don't know, frozen Greek yogurt. Any thoughts on that, Hannah?
Yeah, so it would be similar to when we were trying to build on our understanding of microbes, probiotics, and postbiotics. So when you're heating a yogurt, for example, you would inactivate those microbes, but a lot of yogurts, for example, will add those live microbes back in. But even if they don't, they can still have health benefits, because remember, those cell walls may still be intact, and those cell surface proteins are going to get recognized by lots of different immune cells, and they can provide the benefits of immune modulation. So with the freezing, it's probably very similar, because again, with that water content and the change, it's likely going to rupture a lot of those bacterial cell walls, but a lot of those benefits would still be there in that regard, and those cell, especially those cell proteins. And so lots of foods can fit if, you prefer something in its best way and it's frozen, incorporating that in your diet makes sense. So just kind of having a lot of variety can be super helpful in making sure you're getting lots of sources of live microbes in your diet.
Love it. Thank you, Hannah. All right, so that is time. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending this webinar. From our dairy family to yours, we wish you all a wonderful holiday season and a happy and healthy new year. Have a great day. Thanks again.